Welcome to our discussion on formative assessments. My name is Doug Arana, Manager of Leadership Development for Lindamood-Bell for Schools. In today's video, we will discuss formative assessments and how they don't simply mean quizzes and progress monitoring tools, but also involve daily, real-time responding to response opportunities in instructional sessions. Unlike summative assessments, which evaluate students' learning at the end of an instructional cycle, most often by comparing against some standard or benchmark, formative assessment informs our instruction, and it can also help us adjust it to meet our students' needs immediately. Our real-time diagnosis and practice is supported by research. So let's take a look at what research shows is effective formative assessment. Number one, it clarifies and shares learning intentions and criteria for success. It engineers effective classroom discussions, questions, and learning tasks. It provides feedback that moves learners forward. We'll talk about how our real-time monitoring using responding to the response questioning helps our students move forward in their goal towards independence. It activates students as the owners of their learning styles. We want our students to be proactive participants in the learning process, not reactive. And it also activates students as instructional resources for one another, especially important in a group setting. We are concerned with providing our teachers with a high level of professional development so they can automatically do formative assessment and adjust their instructional practices accordingly. Let's take a look at how our methodology and practices embody formative assessment and see if it checks off the parameters listed here. During our instructional sessions, teachers are consistently and constantly doing real-time monitoring with students. They respond to the response. It allows teachers to monitor students' levels of independence on given tasks and adjust instruction in real time. For example, let's say that we've noticed with our students, they've been really struggling with initial blends. We give them the word spot. Let's say in a decoding approach like our Seeing Stars program, the student looks at a card with the word spot, they write the letters for it, and they read the word as sought. This is telling me, hey, there are some issues here with that initial blend. Let me go ahead and also give my student a chance to reflect and hopefully self-correct and get to the right answer. So I'm going to respond to the response by basically putting their error response in my question. I'm going to remove the word spot from his visual screen so that way he can focus just on his response. After I give him some positive feedback, for example, I'll say, hey, I really liked your thinking on that O saying ah. I'm going to then ask a question about the error. When you said sought, what letter do you picture after the S? My student can now only focus on the response that I have given him, sought. In sought, I'm going to picture an O after the S. The minute that the student says O, he or she is now analyzing their error response. I can then provide them the stimulus one more time, say, hey, what letter do you see there after the S? The student has a chance to reflect and go, oh, no, there's a P there, and I'm picturing an O. My student has that aha moment, there's the error, and now he or she gets a chance to reflect and self-correct. The student's either going to get it right and say spot, or probably make another error. It depends on the situation. And whatever that response is going to tell me about where the student is at this level of work. And it could help me adjust instruction in real time. The great thing about this kind of questioning, the Socratic type questioning, is not only is it helping me assess where the student is at, because of the way that we've structured those questions and the fact that we're not just giving them the answers, that we're trying to get them to really think about the mistake and have a chance to fix it, we're working towards that goal of independence, because all of us as independent readers and learners, we self-correct all the time. when we miscode a word as we're reading, we stop ourselves and we say, whoa, that did not make sense. That's the level of independence that we want to get our students to. The great thing about this kind of instruction is that we can also use it to help us differentiate within our groups. You know, I noticed maybe that this student is really struggling at 4 sounds. The majority of our students in our group are maybe at 4 sounds. I can differentiate my instruction with this particular student. Maybe when I give the group the 4 sound words with him, I can ask him, hey, let's erase the S at the beginning of that word. What would the new word say? Pot. To make sure that he is being met where he needs to be met. It works the other way around too. I might have a student in a group that is currently working at the 4 sound level that can maybe handle a little bit more. And I'm noticing this by the automatic responses that he's providing and how quickly he's accessing his symbol or her symbol imagery to read these words. I might say to that student, hey, let's picture an S at the end of this word. Spots. This frequent real-time diagnosing that I'm doing as an instructor is always allowing me to meet the students where they need to be met. I want to make sure that as I'm questioning and I'm assessing what's happening with the students, I'm using it to change my instruction to meet them where they are. If I need to drop down a level, if I need to add a level, all of this questioning allows me to do so. It's not a scripted approach where we're just going to do the same thing with every single student. It's also very important that we're providing sensory language, sensory input for the students, that we're asking them basically to focus on the sensory process that's needed to get to that right response. That's why the language I'm going to use with my students in something like Seeing Stars is, what letter did you picture? You know, we were doing a program like the LIPS program. The focus there is feeling and hearing. If I see there's a mistake in our comprehension approach, visualizing and verbalizing, I'll ask to see if they can tell me what they picture for the words that they've read or that they've listened to. So it's important that we're always giving the students specific sensory feedback using the Socratic type of questioning. So the Socratic error handling questioning is a type of formative assessment because it allows our students to be part of the learning process. We want them to be active participants in the process and not just reactive. It's helping them think about their mistakes. Hopefully what it does for them is it helps them stop making those same errors over and over again, and it helps them propel forward towards that goal of independence. Let's talk about a couple of other formative assessment tools incorporated into our methodology. In your kits for both Seeing Stars and Visualizing and Verbalizing, you'll find some progress charts or checklists. We'll go through those really quickly in the next couple of slides. These will help us just keep track of the scope and sequence of the programs, and it's a good visual for other stakeholders to see progress made by students. We'll talk about the lesson plans. It's really important that we have lesson plans that are reflective of what we're seeing in sessions. Lesson plans should change often. We want to make sure the students are also feeling progress. We'll also talk about the reading circles, which you have seen in a couple of other courses here in the Imagery Language Connection. It's not just an important visual representation of what our methodology is about, but it can also help us present to our students where they are in terms of their progress towards that goal of independence. And I'll talk about that in a couple of slides as well. Finally, we'll also discuss instructional records, or nicknamed Blue Notes. These are basically some running records where we get to keep track real time of what's happening in sessions. This documentation helps us with our body of evidence when we need to present it to stakeholders and show them what we've done with our students. But more importantly for me as an instructor, it's a place for me to note the kinds of errors and the areas of difficulties that I've observed in sessions, so that I can then create lesson plans that reflect what the students are needing. Let's start with our progress monitoring charts. These come in the kits. The Seeing Stars progress monitoring checklist or chart that you see here has a really nice visual of the scope and sequence of the program from our see, say, and hear, say, and image step at the beginning of the program all the way to multisyllabic words, sight words, and reading. This is a great place to just note what things have been introduced and what has become stable. A lot of times people will go ahead and put little pluses to show stability for a specific letter, or if they have introduced the students to a specific pattern within the syllable cards, just again, to keep track of what has been introduced and hopefully has become stable as they've gone through the process of the Seeing Stars approach. In the back of the progress monitoring checklist, you'll find the Seeing Stars syllable card tracking chart. So as the students are moving through the booklets of the syllable card step, we're making note every 10 cards of their completion of those words or syllables. Again, just a really nice visual for any stakeholder that includes students and parents and principals, but also it's just a nice place to keep track of the progression of their journey through the syllable card step. The Visualizing and Verbalizing progress chart also comes in the kit. It has every single step in the program in sequence. It's a great place, again, to show when you've introduced one of the steps and when it's become stable. In the text steps, starting at sentence by sentence, there's a little section for you to check off as they move through different reading levels of material. The back of the Visualizing and Verbalizing checklist also has a section for notes. Anything that you think is important to note, to keep track of, you can use that sheet to document it. I discussed how the reading circles can also be a nice way to present to students their progression towards that goal of independence. Let's talk about the reading circles first and what they represent. It's just a quick review, as I'm sure you guys have seen the circles in the past in another one of our courses. Those reading circles are a visual representation of our mission statement at Lindamood-Bell for schools. We want to help create independent readers and learners. The programs address the underlying language processing needs of students. So that's symbol imagery, concept imagery, and phonemic awareness. These sensory cognitive functions underlie the necessary parts of reading. For example, all of us, to become effective readers, have to have word attack skills. We need to be able to sound out words, to break down words into its parts. The underlying function that allows our students to be successful word attack skills is phonemic awareness. We need to make sure that they have good phonological processing, that they can auditorily perceive the identity, sequence, and number of sounds within words. But word attack skills are not the only component that's needed to be an effective reader. You have to be able to recognize words instantly. We can't continue to break down words into parts. Students cannot look at a word like tap and just go t-ap every time out. They also have to be able to look at high-frequency words like though and could, so that they recognize those words instantly, and that hopefully allows for better reading accuracy and fluency. The underlying function that helps with orthographic processing is symbol imagery, which is your brain's ability to create mental representations for sounds and letters within words. Finally, we have the subset of language. Students have to use their vocabulary, their language skills, when looking at text to help with reading fluency. The underlying function of concept imagery, which is the ability to image the gestalt or whole, is necessary when they can't depend solely on word attack or word recognition. For example, in the sentence, "The joke made me laugh," students cannot just depend on sounding out the word laugh. And if they haven't seen the word enough, they might not be able to recognize it on sight. Laugh, though, that word creates the right picture for that sentence. It's what would make sense. And so it's all three of these subsets together that allow for students to be able to independently get the words off the page of text. In the long run, though, the encompassing circle of comprehension is our final goal. The whole point of getting the students to be able to get those words off the page of text is for them to be able to interpret it. We want the students to interpret language, oral and written, and then to be able to do something with it. And concept imagery, like I mentioned for the language circle, is the underlying function that allows students to be able to interpret text. All of these together then hopefully yields an independent reader and learner. So how does this help us in terms of showing our students their progress through these approaches and this methodology? I love to show these circles to our students and shade in the areas of strength for them so they can see how close they are to that final goal. Let's say I've got a student who's really struggling with word recognition. His orthographic or her orthographic memory is really the big hurdle that's stopping her or him from being able to read independently on their own. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and shade in some of these other circles and say to my student, hey, these circles represent what's needed for you to be able to just read on your own without any of my help. You have a really great strength here in terms of sounding out words. I've noticed it. You know all of your sounds, you recognize them, you have no problem sounding out the words. I've also noticed that you have really great vocabulary skills. You know a lot of words. I see you use them all the time. And that sometimes allows you to sit in class and orally listen to all of the information that's brought out to your teacher when she's lecturing, and you seem to be able to grasp a lot of that information. What I need to work with you on in this Seeing Stars program is on your orthographic processing skills, your symbol imagery, your ability to see letters and sounds within words in your mind's eye. And as we keep moving through the program, I'm going to shade in this circle. Our goal is to get you to have all of this shaded in. Because that's going to tell me is that you're ready to be an independent reader and learner. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but I think it's helpful for the students to see this. Number one, because it shows them that they have some strengths and that it's not a dire situation. No, you have some pieces that are going to help you. But I also want to make sure that they have a good understanding of what it takes to be able to get to that goal of independent reader. Sometimes our students don't understand just how much work there is to be made to be able to get to that point. And I think it's important for them to know that. And having something concrete like this could be a way for them to really conceptualize it and process it. This is also a really great tool to be able to show parents or other stakeholders like principals or fellow teachers that work with a student, kind of what it takes to be able to get to that goal of independence for our kids. So just another way to kind of think about a way that you can show progress, where students are at, could be these reading circles. I think it's a great tool to have in your pocket. Our last topic for today is on instructional records. If you don't know what instructional records are, I've got a couple of slides that show what they look like. These can be provided to you through your Lindamood-Bell coach. So if you haven't seen these, please request these if you feel like these will be helpful. So these instructional records, why are they so important? These are sheets that we use to document what's been happening in our sessions. I'm going to show you guys some different shorthand abbreviations that you can use to note the progression of the students through each of the steps in programs. It's great because you can show this to other teachers who might be working with your same students, and it helps them figure out what to do in a session. But more importantly, because a lot of us are going to be working with our own students, they're helpful to help us direct our own sessions. It's good to see documented the sounds, for example, that they've really struggled with, or the patterns, or, hey, are there types of stories in visualizing and verbalizing that the students are having a difficulty with? Hey, is vocabulary the thing that's holding them back in terms of progression through some of the grade levels of reading material that we're trying to incorporate into the Visualizing and Verbalizing program? They are tools to gauge progress from session to session, hour to hour, day to day. It's real-time record keeping of what happens in every single session. What are some things that you want to include in these instructional records or blue notes? On the left-hand side, you want to put the date, the hour, maybe your initials, and the program name, and any other important non-instructional information. Why should you initial your name and put the date and hour? Because we want to see that progression, right? And we want to see who was leading those sessions. On that left-hand side of the instructional record, you can put things like, hey, they took a really long bathroom break, or they came in late for groups. It's not an instructional thing, and these records are supposed to be, for the most part, instructional, but it could inform us when we see that there's a pattern, right? If the students are not coming in on time every single time, then it's telling me that that's going to affect our instruction in the long run. You want to use blue or black ink. Note each task that's completed. So jot down the name of the task and then the things that you observed. You want to note the kinds of errors they're making, maybe even note how fast they're reading some words in the Seeing Stars program, for example, in the decoding workbook. Here's an example of a good note to put in an instructional record. Students were doing workbook number 2, page 3. They got 18 out of 20 accurately read, but the rate of their reading was slow. So what do these records look like? Before we get into the record itself, I'd like you guys to take a look at some shorthand abbreviations that we use in the program. You should have access to these. There should be a sheet that can be sent to you by your Lindamood-Bell coach. If you have not seen the sheet before, you have not received it, please go ahead and request it from them. This is something that's available to you guys. I'm not going to go over every single abbreviation in this video. This will take quite a bit. A lot of these obviously make sense. I do want to talk about a couple of terms that I think are important to note. Receptive and expressive is a couple of terms that we use a lot in the Visualizing and Verbalizing program. If you don't remember this from your workshops, receptive means that the students are receiving language. So if you're reading a story to your students, it means that they're receiving the information receptively. If they are reading it out loud or to themselves silently, then that would be expressive language. So I just want to make sure that I mentioned those two terms. Color encoding or blocks is a term that's used in the LIPS program. If you're not doing the LIPS approach, don't worry about that. It's not something that you're going to see in the Seeing Stars approach. But for the most part, everything that's on here is an abbreviation for a task in our Seeing Stars approach or Visualizing and Verbalizing. Again, this is just shorthand so that we don't have to write out everything in the instructional records. What we really want to see in those instructional records are the things that are happening in the session. Another one that I want to bring up here is self-corrections. I think it's really important for us to note when the students are correcting themselves without our help and our prompting. So make sure that you are including SC, self-correction, that abbreviation, when the students make a correction after you've helped them and provided them with some of that Socratic questioning. So these are the instructional records, guys. It's a very simple document. Like I said, here's that left-hand side where you're going to go ahead and put your initials. I'm going to go ahead and put mine there, the date. And you want to make any notes that are non-instructional there, like, again, coming in late to the group. Maybe there was an assembly and I cut the session short. Under tasks, you're going to put, again, the abbreviation for the tasks that you're working on. And each of these columns represents a different student. You can see how very simple we keep things. The pluses represent the students got that word or that concept correct. Minus means, of course, that they did not get that one correct. And then, like I talked about earlier, please note self-corrections as well with an SC. Make sure that everything that is to the right of the task column is always about instruction and not behavior. This is an instructional record. Here's another example of, again, these instructional records or blue notes. We keep things simple. We're using these to, again, keep track of what's happening every day in sessions. They are really helpful because it helps you then look back on and see what is consistent, what's inconsistent, and this will allow you or your Lindamood-Bell coach, if they are providing you with the lesson plans, to create an effective next lesson plan that's going to meet the students' needs based on the information that you've gathered during your sessions in these instructional records. So let's take a look at how we started this discussion. Does our method, our approach, check off all of these parameters for effective formative assessment? Clarifying and sharing learning intentions and criteria for success. The reading circles, discussing what we're trying to accomplish with our students is a good example of that one there. We're letting the students know what they're going to need to be able to be independent readers and learners, the journey that they're going to have to take, the processes that have to be in place. Engineering effective classroom discussions, questions, and learning tasks. I think we do that, especially with a lot of the way that we question in both the Seeing Stars and Visualizing and Verbalizing programs. We want to make sure, for example, that we're including all the students in our group, right, in terms of their learning. That's what we question to all of their responses. Providing feedback that moves learners forwards. Absolutely. I think when we're trying to get our students to think about their own thinking, when they make those errors, it's allowing them to reflect on the mistake, and hopefully they won't make that mistake again. Sometimes that takes a few rounds. Sometimes it could happen automatically right then and there in that situation. But Socratic error handling, the core of it is always to try to make sure that the students are moving towards that goal of independence. And they do that by learning to self-reflect and self-monitor, self-correct. And they do that through our questioning. Does it activate students as the owners of their learning styles? Absolutely. You know, if there's something that I can tell you about the Lindamood-Bell approaches that can honestly be a culture changer. We don't just give kids answers. You know, if the student looks at the word spot and says "sot," we're not just going to say, "Oh, you know what? That was spot. Let's try that hard. You know, again another time, and let's try a little harder." That kind of language, that kind of feedback, never comes out of our mouths. We always take errors as an opportunity to learn. We want the students to really reflect on their mistakes. That is the best way to get them to be proactive participants in the learning process and not just reactive. They are reactive when we just give them answers. And does it activate students as instructional resources for one another? We haven't talked about that in terms of group instruction, but if we were in a group setting and we have that one student that's saying "sot" for spot, there's a good chance that some of the other students in the group would have been thinking the same thing too. And as they're listening to that error handling process going back and forth, they get to reflect themselves on those kinds of errors. So yes, I do feel like the students are then instructional resources for one another within that group setting because of the way that we question using the Socratic method. So in conclusion, I do feel like our methodology, our approaches do embody effective formative assessment. Thank you so much for your time.